Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of On Attachment. In today's episode, we are talking about how fearful avoidant attachment shows up in relationships. So whenever I talk about fearful avoidant attachment, I always get this resounding feedback of more. Please talk more about fearful avoidant attachment. And as I've said, I think that that's because there tends to be a bit less by way of content around fearful avoidant attachment relative to anxious attachment and even avoidant attachment. And I know that many folks who struggle with fearful avoidant attachment are what we might call seekers, people who really want to understand themselves better and so are really hungry for information that feels validating and illuminating as to why they struggle with the things that they struggle with. So I'm hoping that in today's episode, it's going to be a little bit free form in the sense that I'm just going to be sharing tidbits of things that fearful avoidant attachers are likely to experience and struggle with in their relationships, how that attachment style shows up, some things that you might expect. And I'm hoping that this will be insightful both for people who identify with that attachment style and folks who might be in relationship with someone with that attachment style and those patterns, so that you can understand a little more what drives it. Maybe you can feel seen. I think that many folks with those attachment patterns can feel quite broken. And so I think anyone who has that tendency towards feeling broken, feeling like there's something wrong with them, it can be extremely validating and encouraging to realize that you're far from alone in your experience. And not only is there an explanation, but there is hope. It's not something that you are condemned to struggle with for the rest of your life. There are things that you can do to shift those patterns towards something that feels more sturdy, more stable, more secure, and can give you some relief from that inner turmoil. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before I dive into that, a couple of announcements. As I've shared a bit recently, I've got some exciting events coming up in Australia, a workshop in Sydney at the end of November and a retreat in Byron Bay in May next year. I've also got some really exciting things in the pipeline, brand new things online, and I'm not quite ready to announce that yet. I know that sounds very cagey. It's mostly because I haven't finalized the details and I don't want to lock myself into anything prematurely. But if you're interested in, any or all of those things, I really encourage you to jump on my email list. I send out a weekly-ish newsletter. I'd love to be able to say every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. it goes out like clockwork. Sadly, I am not that organized. But I send out a weekly-ish newsletter that dives deep into the types of themes that I explore in my podcast. Sometimes it is a deep dive into a podcast episode, sort of in an extended blog post format. I have over 30,000 people who receive my email newsletters, and I always get really beautiful feedback. So if you're interested in receiving those newsletters just for the fun of it, jump on my email list, and with the added bonus that is where I always announce things first, opportunities to work with me and new programs, new offerings. My email list always gets first dibs on that. So if you're interested in any of those ways to work with me, for the in-person stuff, you can go straight to my website and sign up, or for the upcoming things that I haven't quite announced yet, jump on my email list and you'll be the first to hear. Okay, so let's dive into talking about fearful avoidant attachment and how it shows up in relationships. So I think it's helpful to say at the outset that for many folks with fearful avoidant attachment, when they're not in a relationship, they feel pretty under control, relatively speaking. They might feel like they have a reasonable grip on their, emotional regulation, things like reactivity, which can really come out a lot in relationships, very easily triggered, might be less apparent when they're not in a relationship. For some people, it'll be like, night and day, like they're totally fine when they're single. But once they get into a relationship, all of that stuff really rises to the surface very quickly. For some others, I would say those patterns of reactivity and being very easily triggered by other people, being very sensitive to perceived criticism and feeling very defensive, those things can bleed into other areas of life, so friendships or working relationships. But for the most part, I would say that people with fearful avoidant attachment will feel more under control when they're not in a relationship. And that makes sense when we think about the fact that for fearful avoidant folks, they have an imprint around relationships that the people closest to me have the greatest capacity to hurt me. I really long for that connection and intimacy, but I'm so afraid of it when I get close to it that all of my protective parts come out with guns blazing, so fierce in their commitment to keeping me safe from all of the things that I associate with intimacy, which are a lot of fears. So it can be really disorienting and confusing for someone with fearful avoidant attachment and for someone who's in relationship with someone with fearful avoidant attachment, that they can really seek out relationships. I think that there is this hopeless romantic part in many fearful avoidant people. They do have, at least on the surface, a positive association with relationships in that they are inclined to seeking them out. They want love, they want connection. And so they sort of move towards that and seek that. And I think initially there can be a tendency to pedestalize a partner, to really idolize them and to think like, this is it, right? This is the person I've been waiting for. And in this relationship, unlike all the others, everything's going to be great. All of my demons are going to sort of dissolve because this person's going to be the one. I'm not going to have to struggle in the ways that I've struggled previously. It's almost like this is my salvation. And so there can be this tendency to really look up to someone that they're initially drawn to and attracted to and seeking out relationship with. And I think for the person on the other side of that equation, that can feel, really wonderful, as it does at the start of a relationship. I think we can all put a partner on a pedestal at the start of a relationship and kind of see them through rose-colored glasses. But I think the fearful avoidant really does do this a lot. And I think not only do they think the partner's amazing, but they do tend to have these stories, whether conscious or not, that this partner is going to kind of be their ticket out of all of that stuff that they've struggled with for so long. And this is where it gets really challenging, because inevitably there's a fall from grace there, right? The higher you put someone on a pedestal, the further they have to fall. And so I think that as the relationship progresses, as things get closer, more intimate, the fearful avoidant will invariably be brought into contact with their wounds, their sensitivities, because intimacy is such a sore point, is such a challenge for them, that as much as they yearn for it and seek it out and long for it, when they get it, when they get close to it, it actually really terrifies them. And that can be as confusing for them as it is for the other person, right? It's not like they've done this in a really cold and calculated way. I think that if you spend too much time in certain areas of the internet that are talking about like love bombing and narcissism and all of that, it's not to say that that doesn't happen, but that's really not what's happening for someone with fearful avoidant attachment. It's not a manipulative strategy to try and hurt someone, and it is as confusing for them as it is for the other person. The fact that they can go from all in and really excited about the future and talking about all these things and seemingly so smitten with the other person to really turning. And the turn can be quite pronounced. It can be really extreme. It's not just a fade out. They can go from thinking someone is this like incredible best person I've ever met, love of my life, to thinking that they are just the worst, right? You are my worst enemy. You are, total villain. And oftentimes they can't explain that in rational terms, but it's so persuasive and it's so real, this almost sense of hatred towards their partner that can kind of fall upon them so quickly that you can have one small rupture, and the fear and the rage and the heat that comes up in them directed towards their partner can feel so intense. And oftentimes the only way they know how to deal with that is by pulling away, by pushing away, by getting as far away from their partner as they can. And I think that I would argue deep down, most folks with fearful avoidant attachment know that the blame they place on a partner is probably not the full picture, because deep down, and really this is another key piece here, at the heart of fearful avoidant attachment is a lot of shame, a lot of feeling broken, feeling like there is something really fundamentally wrong with me, and kind of almost self-loathing a lot of the time. And so as much as their protective strategy is to push someone away, blame them, make them the bad guy, I think depending on the level of self-awareness, I think on some level, many people would know that deep down they feel like they're the bad guy and they're pushing someone away to both save the other person and save themselves from that. And I think you might even hear someone with fearful avoidance saying things like, you deserve better than me, or I just hurt people, I'm too fucked up to be in a relationship, those sorts of sentiments. And so they feel like they almost have to push someone away, both for their own self-preservation, because as we said at the start, they feel so much more kind of level and grounded when they're not in relationship. So for their own sake and the sake of this person that they do kind of put on a pedestal and they do feel undeserving of much of the time. It's almost like I have to save you from me. But it doesn't always come out that way. Often that will be cloaked in kind of anger or blame or defensiveness or criticism. So all of that can feel really complicated and it can feel messy and confusing and really painful for everyone involved. I think another key piece, and it sort of ties in with this, both the shame and that longing for intimacy, is that often fearful avoidance will pull away when they feel like someone is getting to see them. So again, it's this sense of like, I so yearn to be known. I so yearn to be understood and loved and seen. And the idea of that actually happening, the reality of that is so deeply frightening that as soon as anyone actually gets close to knowing me and seeing me, I'm inclined to consciously or subconsciously come up with some sort of reason to push them away. So I think because shame is such a big piece for many folks with fearful avoidant attachment, often shame and secrecy go hand in hand. So there might be certain parts of themselves that they have been, not fully upfront about. They haven't been honest with the people that they're in relationship with. Maybe they're really compartmentalizing or not being fully authentic, which I think makes sense when someone feels like there's something wrong with them or they're broken or there is something to be ashamed of. Often secrecy and pretending and half-truths are a strategy to conceal those parts of themselves that you have deemed to be unacceptable or unlovable. And so while there is this yearning to be known and seen and to have true intimacy with someone, I think that sounds really nice in theory, but in practice, that requires letting someone see parts of you that maybe you've never shown to anyone before. And when you believe at a really fundamental level that no one could ever love those parts because you can't love those parts or you feel you can't love those parts, the idea of someone else actually seeing those, when it's crunch time, that's pretty terrifying. And most people, I would say, will default to a protective part, a protective strategy to stop that from actually having to happen. It takes a huge amount of capacity and self-awareness and bravery and vulnerability to actually go there, a huge amount of safety in the relational container. And so unless you've got that safety established, which arguably is a bit chicken and egg, because I think that it's hard to have that level of safety when you haven't been vulnerable, when you haven't been honest and authentic. And so I think that often what will happen is the relationship lacks that level of emotional safety, lacks that level of containment and trust. And so when push comes to shove, the idea of actually being vulnerable, being honest, being forthcoming about those parts of you that you've kept secret or that you've hidden away, that can just be so confronting and so daunting that you feel it's just not worth it, that it's too high risk, because if they see that, they'll reject me and they'll confirm everything that I already deeply believe about myself, which is that no one could ever love that if they were to really see that. And so rather than taking that risk of showing yourself to someone, it feels like the safer thing to do is pull back at that point, to end the relationship, to make the other person the problem, to come up with some sort of reason why it's not a good fit. All of these can be kind of different branches of the same tree, which is wanting intimacy, but as soon as I get close to it, I've got to find an exit because it just feels almost claustrophobic, the idea of being with your back up against the wall and actually having to face the reality of being seen and known by someone fully laid bare without all of those, protectors standing in front of you and keeping that buffer or keeping that distance that has been a safety blanket for you for probably most of life. So the last piece that I want to speak to, and I do apologize, I realize this has been a very all over the place episode. I did warn you in the introduction that it was going to be a little bit stream of consciousness. But one piece that I want to speak to is a question that I get a lot, which is how fearful avoidant attachment might manifest itself or express itself in relationship with different kinds of partners. So matched with someone who is dismissive avoidant, are you likely to be more anxious? Whereas with a more anxious partner, are you likely to be more avoidant? And the short answer is yes, in most cases. I think when we take a step back and go, okay, attachment styles are basically describing the strategies that we use to create safety for ourselves in relationships. And they also describe what types of things cause us stress or fear in relationships. When we look at it that way and we consider that for the fearful avoidant, they experience both anxiety and avoidance. They rank high on both of those metrics. And they also tend to experience the core wounds of both anxious and avoidant attachment. So they struggle with a fear of abandonment and a fear of rejection. They also experience that fear of engulfment, that fear of loss of self. They're very protective of their independence. They don't want to feel like they're being smothered. They feel defective in relationships and they have a lot of shame around that. So they kind of have aspects of both anxious and avoidant attachment. Because of that, because they, have core wounds from both ends of the spectrum, they have protective strategies to accompany those core wounds or that have grown out of those core wounds. So we can then see that someone with fearful avoidant attachment, if they're in relationship with someone with more dismissive avoidant patterns, it is more likely that that person with dismissive avoidant patterns who's, leaning on their strategies of maybe creating distance, maybe being non-committal, not being very clear in their feelings, maybe pushing away intimacy, that is more likely to trigger the abandonment wounds and the fear of rejection in the fearful avoidant, and so is more likely to enliven the strategies that grow out of that. So trying to get close, trying to get reassurance, trying to get someone to like them, the more people-pleasing parts. Contrast that with fearful avoidant in relationship with someone with more anxious attachment patterns who might be more clingy and reassurance seeking and wanting to get closer and closer and closer. That's likely to trigger the intimacy fears of the fearful avoidant, the fears of being smothered, the fear of engulfment, the protectiveness around their independence, and as we just talked about, the shame and the sense of brokenness, that sense of I can't let you get too close because you'll see me, and that terrifies me. And so in those circumstances, in that kind of dynamic, you're more likely to get avoidant strategies of pushing them away, of being non-committal, of being flaky, of criticizing a partner, finding things that are wrong with their partner as a way to create distance. So I think seen against that backdrop, this question that I get all the time from people as if it's a great mystery actually makes perfect sense. That if you have more fearful avoidant patterns and you carry all of those kind of core wounds and fears, that depending on who's on the other side of the equation, you are more likely to kind of animate or manifest different aspects of those strategies depending on what wound is really front and center for you, what you're being most brought into contact with. So it actually, I think, makes a lot of sense when seen against that backdrop. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. I hope that was a helpful, albeit a little bit all over the place, dive into how fearful avoidant attachment shows up in relationships, some of the things that are likely to present as challenges, what you might experience. As I said in the introduction, my intention with this is hopefully to allow you, if this is you, to feel validated, to feel understood, to know that there's perfectly good reasons for why you struggle with the things you struggle with, as is true for all of us. Our patterns really make perfect sense in the context of our past experience. And there are things that we can do. You're not inherently broken or defective. You're not just bad at relationships and doomed to struggle forever. It's just really about understanding, okay, what's going on for me here? What am I afraid of? and what could I do to create a little more safety for myself and in my relationships so that I feel able to step towards the edge of what is comfortable for me in a way that allows me to build that capacity and build the container and my ability to hold those things. So hopefully that's been insightful for you. As always, really grateful for those of you who leave feedback, leave reviews, and let me know if you want more of this kind of content. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks, guys.